Good evening, good evening. Yeah, I'm over my bug, over my travels, over my everything. Thank you. Thanks for all the good wishes, everybody. I didn't thank you personally, most of you. I do thank you for your good wishes. And everything's going along swimmingly right now. Unfortunately, I have to do a lot of traveling this year. And as you probably know, traveling is not the best thing for our sages say like this, that Shinoi Veset Tchilas Choili. If you change your habits, you change your way of doing things, your habits of doing things, that's the beginning of illness. You become susceptible to illness. So change makes you susceptible to but there's all kinds of bugs going around, and especially when you're in an airport, on an airplane, and people are sneezing and coughing all over the place and this and that. So you expect to probably pick up something. In any event, let's not talk about that tonight. The topic, I gave you a choice of topics for tonight. One was the four worlds, and the other was tranquility. And by a margin of probably 10 to 1 or more, everyone decided they wanted tranquility. So it's going to be a very tranquil evening in that case. Okay. So what is the concept that we're talking about here? Let me start off with a story. The story is a story about the time of the Baal Shem Tov. It happened to the Baal Shem Tov, actually. And the story is going to come to illustrate to us a certain idea. And that idea is the prerequisite, if you like to say it like that, for tranquility. What is required to acquire tranquility? What do we have to do? What's necessary? So the story begins like this. It was revealed to the great Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov was the founder of the Hasidic path of doing things, Hasidism. It was revealed to the Baal Shem Tov that it was a person of very lofty spiritual stature who lived in a certain place that he was traveling nearby, and this person lived there near to where he was, so he decided he was going to go and see what this man was all about. And that's in fact what he did. He went and he met the person who happened to be an innkeeper. He's a fairly simple person, straightforward, but it was revealed to him that he did have a very high spiritual stature, lofty spiritual stature, and he was wondering why. What was it that this person was doing, or what was it about him that was so unusual and so special? So I observed him for a while, and they sort of got friendly and were talking, and one day the man said, I have to go and visit the local poritz. The poritz, it's a term for the local baron or whatever, the lord of that area, whatever they call them, baron. He has to go visit the baron and pay his rent. You had to pay for the rent the way they did it in those days. You pay the rent for the whole year, right? For the inn, you had to pay the rent for the inn for the year. So he starts going out the door, and the Baal Shem Tov says, "Well, haven't you forgotten something?" So he says, "No. Why did I forget?" The Baal Shem Tov said, "You forgot to take the money with you." He says, "Oh, I don't have it actually." So I didn't forget it. I don't have it. So the Baal Shem Tov said, "So what are you going to do? Like, what are you going for if if you don't have the money? Why are you going in the first place?" I said, "Well, I assume that by the time I get to the poritz, who lives, a good few miles away from here, by the time I get there, I'll have the money." The Baal Shem Tov was like kind of stunned. This was an unusual type of behavior. He hadn't seen this kind of thing very often before. So anyway, he watches from the window and he sees that from an upper balcony or something like that, and he's watching this man, the innkeeper, drive right away on his horse to the poritz, to the Baron, and he sees after he's quite a distance from the house, a mile or two from the house or whatever, he sees this beautiful carriage coming along the road in the opposite direction, and the carriage driver stops the carriage, and he could see from a distance that this man, the innkeeper, was having a conversation with somebody in the carriage. Then he sees, again in the distance, he doesn't know what's going on, exactly what the conversation was, but he sees from a distance the innkeeper puts up his hands like this, and puts up his hands like this, and shakes his head, and off he goes. And the carriage goes off in a different direction. The Baal Shem Tov was waiting. Sometime later, towards late afternoon, the innkeeper comes back. And the Baal Shem Tov said to him, "What happened?" So I said, "Yeah, well, I paid the pirates. I paid the Baron. And how exactly did you do that?" He said, "Well, when I was going on the way, actually, someone from the neighboring estate, one of the neighboring estates, was actually on his way to me, and he stopped me on the road, and he said that he has a wedding, his daughter's getting married, and he needs all the barrels of vodka that I have." Innkeepers in those days used to make vodka. So he said he needs all the vodka that I have, because he's having a very big party and he's going to have a lot of guests, and in Russia or wherever it was, in one of those areas, Ukraine, whatever, no party is a party without vodka flowing everywhere. So he wanted to buy my vodka. So I told him my price for the 10 barrels of vodka that I had. I told him the price of my rental, how much I need for the rent for the year. So I said, "No, that's way over the top. That's way too much. I'm not paying that amount of money." He said, "Okay, no problem. That's my price. If you find it somewhere else, well, you're welcome to go get it somewhere else. That's fine. I'm not holding you to your price. Anyway, I'm not holding you to your offer." Anyway, he left, and I continued on to the pirates. Sometime later, it was obviously over the horizon. The Baal Shem Tov didn't see it. Sometime later, as he was still on his way to the pirates, the next door landowner, the fellow who was making a wedding for his daughter, had a change of heart, and maybe found out that he couldn't get any vodka anywhere else. And how can you have a wedding without vodka? So he ran after the innkeeper, and eventually he gave him, with a little bit more haggling, he gave him the price that he wanted, and the man went and paid for his rent for the year. And that was the story. Now, the main point of the story is that this fellow, the innkeeper, just was not hassled at all. Like he was, he wasn't in a tiz, and he wasn't worried, and he wasn't nervous, and he wasn't biting his fingernails. He was completely calm and relaxed about having to go and pay a bill for which he didn't have the money. Completely calm and relaxed. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, what was the secret of his calmness and his relaxedness? He obviously didn't have any money in the bank that he could pay up with. What was the foundation of his being calm? And that will explain to us what this whole concept of equanimity is. Actually, there's a famous teaching of the Baal Shem Tov where he says like this: Shivisi Hashem lenegdi somid. It's a verse. He quotes a verse from King David, a verse from Psalms. In Psalms it says, I think it's Psalms 15 if I'm not mistaken, Shivisi Hashem lenegdi somid, which means like this, literally translated, I have placed God before me always. I have placed God before me always at all times. But the Baal Shem Tov explains it a little bit differently. He says like this: I have placed God before me in such a way that all circumstances at all times are always equal. The word shivisi in Hebrew, let me just write it in the chat over here so you can see, I'll just write it in English. Oops. Shivisi or, right, shivisi. Depends how you pronounce it. Ashkenazim, in other words, people of European descent pronounce it shivisi. People of Sephardi descent, in other words, Middle Eastern descent would pronounce it shiviti. Anyway, shiviti Hashem L'Nei Summit, the word shiviti, or in Hebrew, right, shiviti, says the Baal Shem Tov, comes from the word, well, it really means I have placed before me, right? I have placed. But it also is related to the word shaveh, or in Hebrew, in English, shaveh. Shaveh. Shaveh means equal. Everything's equal, right? All things are equal. Everything is equal in my eyes. Why is everything equal? Simply because such a person has such trust in God. It's called bitachon. Bitachon, trust, right? That he's not worried at all about anything. He's never worried about anything. Now, let's explain why it is, or how it could be, that a person is not worried. Let's tell another story. This time a story of Rabbi Akiva, the famous Rabbi Akiva, and it's a story I think I've told before. There are two great sages, Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Nachum Ish Gamzu. Both of them were great sages, and both of them faced some pretty rough circumstances, and did not let the circumstances overcome them, but they approached it in a different way. First of all, the story with Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was traveling, he was on his way somewhere, and as they did in those days, you travel by donkey or by horse or whatever. He had a donkey, and he took with him a rooster and a candle. A donkey and a rooster and a candle. What do you need the donkey for? To travel on, right? So he wouldn't have to walk. The rooster to wake him up at dawn so that he could study and prepare himself for his prayers and so on and so forth. And a candle so that he could study at night. Anyway, he's on his way to a certain town, and it took him longer than anticipated. And when he came to the town, he found that the doors on the gates of the town were already locked. And the rule was the guards at the door were told, you don't open the gate at past a certain hour, you don't open it for anybody. Right? In those days were the days of marauding bands of various criminals and so on and so forth, highwaymen, robbers, foreign armies, who knows what, right? So the gates of the city were closed at a certain time, the gates of the town closed, and no one comes in and no one goes out. That's the way it is. Okay. So Rabbi Akiva comes to the gate, closed. So he asks the guard, can't you let me in? You can see I'm not, a danger. No, sir, we have our rules, we have our instructions, we cannot let anybody in. What's Rabbi Akiva going to do? So he decided he has to stay in one of the fields overnight. What's he going to do? He has to stay outside of the town. So he found some place that there was some shelter, whatever, behind a haystack or something. And he sat down to study. As he's studying, some kind of bobcat or whatever it was, one of these wild cats, a large wild cat of some sort or another, ate his rooster. And I forgot to mention, when that happened, Rabbi Akiva said, when he was not allowed into the city, Rabbi Akiva said, "Call Ma David Rahman Latav Avid, whatever God does is for the good. Whatever God does is for the good. Even though it's not revealed as good right now, nevertheless, I'm sure it'll turn out fine in the end." Okay, so then when this cat ate his rooster, Kol Ma David Rahman Latav Avid, whatever God does for the good. And then his candle blew out, and didn't have any way of relighting it. Whatever God does is for the good. And then his donkey was killed by a bear or something, whatever, some other wild animal killed his donkey, a lion. And Rabbi Akiva was kind of bereft of everything, but anyway, he said, whatever God does for the good. In any event, the morning, the sun comes up, he wakes up, and he goes to the town, and he finds that the town was attacked during the night by some marauding gangs, and they scaled the walls, and they went in, and many people were killed, and others were seriously injured, and basically the town was a total wreck. And had he been in the town, he would have probably been the subject of some pretty rough treatment, if not worse. So he then understood, that the fact that he didn't have a candle, so they couldn't see him in the field, the fact that his rooster didn't crow, so they wouldn't hear him, and his donkey didn't bray, so he couldn't be located. All of that was whatever God does is for the good. So he had this kind of attitude that everything that God does is for the good. It might not be good right now, but it is for the good eventually. That's an interesting question. Someone just asked the question, is there a different flow of understanding based on studying at day or at night? Yes. Definitely, according to the Zohar, there is a tremendous difference. And in fact, even in Jewish custom, there is a difference. We do not study the written Torah at night, but we do study the oral Torah at night. Only the oral Torah and Kabbalah, particularly at night. But during the day, one can also read Mikra. Mikra means biblical verses. There's reasons for that. Let's not go into them now, so I can finish with the idea. If you want to know more about it, I'll tell you perhaps at the end of the class. Just remember the question. Okay, so everything that happened is for the good. Right? That's what the conclusion was that he had. Now, he did not say that what's happening to me now is a good thing. He didn't feel it that way and didn't experience it that way. It was only later on that it was revealed to him that it was a good thing because of what happened subsequently, that he found that he would have been subject to attack and harm had he been inside the town. So he discovered that later on. But while it was happening, he didn't feel that way. We can now start to approach this idea of equanimity, to have the courage to be able to say that everything it's all in God's hands and everything will be fine. Whether what happens to me is good, whether what happens to me is ostensibly bad, it's all in God's hands, and therefore I don't have to worry about anything. I don't have to worry, right? Since I know that whatever is best for me is what will happen to me, and certainly God is looking out for my best, wants to make sure that I have the, whatever it is that I need, even if what I need right now is a tikkun, I need some kind of rectification, and therefore something bad is going to happen. Therefore, I'm fully trusting that everything is okay. And that leads to kind of first level of equanimity. However, that is somewhat insufficient. Why is it insufficient? Because it's not only that we trust that God can do anything and He can take me out of my negative circumstances, or He can take me out of, He can release me from my troubles and take me out of whatever suffering I'm experiencing right now. Not only can He, but in fact He will. In other words, to believe that God can do that, of course He can. Of course, like that's not. It's not a novelty. It's not a novel idea. It's clear. But that he can is not enough. That he will is what we're talking about. That he will actually do that. He's for sure going to do that. Now, what is the foundation for such a belief? How can a person have such confidence in himself that that'll happen? After all, is anyone so great and so righteous and so pure and so holy that they could say that none of the actions which I have done in the recent past or in the distant past will have any effect, any negative effect on the goodness that God wants to shower upon me? Obviously, when a person goes through suffering or difficult circumstances or whatever it is, very often that is in order to rectify certain behaviors or certain attitudes or certain thought patterns that need rectification. In other words, to put it in sort of simple language, although I don't like to use this language very much because it can easily be misunderstood, it's very possible that a person sinned, right? And who is there, our sages ask, who is there on earth, even the most righteous person, that could say, I never ever did anything wrong? Now, it's true that righteous people and holy people don't sin. A tzaddik, right? It's called a tzaddik, someone who's righteous, holy, doesn't sin. We know that, right? But the word sin in English it's a very sort of a black and white kind of a word, right? Mostly a black word, actually. But sin has a certain meaning in English that it does not have in Hebrew. The word chet, it's spelled like this that's how they usually spell it. Sometimes, in the Hebrew it would be like this. Chet, right? The word chet, or what we would call sin, or usually translated as sin or transgression. The word chet really means to miss the mark, right? To miss the target. You're just a little bit off bullseye. So even though a tzaddik, a righteous, holy person, is not subject to sinning as such, right? He doesn't sin. He or she doesn't sin, but maybe they're just a little bit off target, a little bit off the bullseye. That's called a chet. As far as that tzaddik is concerned, it's also called a chet, right? That's also a sin. Sin in quotes, right? Not a real sin, but it's missing the target. So the sages say, who is there, even a tzaddik, who doesn't sin, who doesn't miss the target sometimes? There's no one that can say, I'm so perfect that I never missed. I never made a mistake, right? No one can say that. So therefore, how can a person be so confident? And we're talking about regular people. How can a regular person be so confident that everything is fine, that no matter what he did or didn't do, he, she, it's still okay? God will nevertheless treat that person in a way that is what's called in Hebrew lifnim mishurat hadin, beyond the letter of the law, right? In a positive sense, beyond the letter of the law, meaning to say with compassion, with mercy, rather than simply with dispensing the law as is. But what's the foundation for it? How can a person have such trust that everything's going to turn out just fine? The answer is this. There's an expression which was used very often by the third Lubavitcher Rebbe, which was as follows: Tracht gut wird sein gut. Think good, it'll be good. Think positive, it'll be good, it'll be positive. Now we're talking about positive thinking. Is, people think it's a fairly modern idea. in the past 50, 60 years, right? Positive thinking. No. The Tzemach Tzedek lived about 200 years ago, and this was already a well-known concept as far as he's concerned. In fact, it's even based on the Zohar. The Zohar says like this, that the higher worlds give forth their influence based on the way the lower worlds set themselves up. In other words, what goes on in the lower worlds, the communication that a person receives from the higher worlds, when I say communication, I don't mean necessarily prophecy or divine spirit, whatever you want to call it, right? I don't mean necessarily, or intuition, I don't necessarily mean that. But everything that comes from the upper world depends on how we set ourselves up down below in this world. If we set ourselves up below in this world as always nervous and always worrying about what we've done wrong and what we could be doing wrong and sort of nitpicking ourselves, then the response is a nitpicking response. Doesn't mean to say you have to pat yourself on the back for always being a great guy and give yourself a Medal of Honor. I believe there was a president who's just about leaving us now who just gave himself a Medal of Honor, so you don't have to do that, right? But you can trust and be confident in the fact that things will be good. If you think it will be good, it will be good. Even if you're not worthy of it. Why? Because worthiness is not the issue here. If you approach things in a way of, am I worthy, am I not worthy, does my behavior warrant such a response, does it not warrant such a, if you're thinking like that, then that's going to be the response. The response is going to be, well, let's check it out and we'll see, right? But if the response is, yes, it is very necessary, this trust is necessary, a greater closeness to God, and in fact, this is in and of itself a closeness to God. One has such trust in the nature of the Creator, the nature of the nature of God, of our Maker, that it couldn't be otherwise, right? Because since God's nature is, as the Talmud says, Teva Tov Lahitiv, it's the nature of He who is good to always do good. It's we that get in the way. So therefore, if we focus on the good, that what the good is what's going to happen, that positive thought itself brings along the positive response. Let me just tell you a little bit of background to that, to what caused the Tzemach Tzedek to say this. A person came to the Tzemach Tzedek, who was a very great tzaddik, a very, very wise man. Someone came to him to ask him for a blessing for a person who was extremely ill. And his response was, Tracht gut, wird sein gut. If you think good, it will be good, right? If you think of the good, the response is going to be good. If you think positive, that the right thing will happen, then the right thing will happen. Now, let me just put this in a sort of more practical sense. Let's say you're faced with an issue and you don't really have a resolution to this. You don't know how to resolve the issue. You don't know how to resolve it. What do? First of all, attitude has to be, there is a solution, and the solution will present itself even if I don't find the solution, but the solution will be found. It'll present itself at the right time in the right place. What's the solution? Well, let's look at the future. We can imagine how things are going to be in the future when that problem no longer exists, when that problem has been solved. What do I see in my mind's eye when that problem no longer exists? What do I see around me? How do I visualize it? What's going on? What's my emotional response? What's going on in the world at that time? Who am I with? What are the circumstances in which that issue is resolved? You start to think of it in terms of a resolution rather than in terms of a problem, right? The problem, if one focuses on the problem just seems to get bigger and deeper and more intractable and more unsolvable and so on and so forth. So let's not think about the problem. Let's think about the solution, right? We look towards the future when the problem is already solved. Let's say, in the example which I gave, that the person was very, very ill, right? If we could imagine that we just saw the person getting up out of bed in radiant health, right? Walking and so on and so forth. And we imagine that as strongly as possible, as strong as we can in our mind's eye, and see all the surrounding circumstances. And then we can ask ourselves a question, well, what was the step that came just before that? How did that happen? Right? How did that happen that the person became well again? And you can, I'm not saying in matters of health and things like that it's possible to do it like this, but when there is a problem that we can do something about, other than pray, when there's a problem we can do something about, so we could think like, what was the step that led directly to that? What would have had to be the thing that preceded the final result? Right? What would have had to be the thing that preceded the final result? Let's say, I don't know, let's take a simple example, a promotion, right? A promotion at work. Promotion was obviously with a bigger salary, lower taxes, whatever, yeah? A promotion at work. So you visualize the promotion at work, and this is actually, you visualize in your mind's eye. What was the step that came right before that, right before the promotion? What was it that made the boss decide that he wants to give you a promotion? What was the thing? And then you can start to sort of work your way back to what it is that you have to do to be able to earn that promotion. But start thinking in terms of the solution rather than in terms of the problems. Think of the positive thing, tracht gut. Look at the person as if he's already well, and that'll have an effect on me. Will it have an effect on a person's physical? Yes, right? I've been to hospitals many times. I've gone to visit people in hospitals and so on. And a lot of the time, a person's wellness depends on their mood. Now, I know that there's certain people here who run nursing homes and homes for kids and things like that, and involved in medical and in the psychological aspects of things. By changing a person's attitude, very often the illness itself can be dealt with in a much easier way. Someone who's in a blue funk about being ill will probably have a much harder time getting a cure. In fact, I heard of a case fairly recently where people's medical records got mixed up. It probably happens fairly, when I say fairly often, I mean it doesn't happen 1 in 10, but it could happen, I suppose, 1 in 10,000. Anyway, the person's medical records got mixed up, and came back with a diagnosis, a very serious diagnosis of very, very serious illness. And the person he wasn't feeling well or whatever, he went into the doctor, and they took all these tests and so on and so forth. The tests come back, there's a very serious illness, and really, I'm sorry, Mr. Smith, or whatever his name was, according to our assessment, you maybe have 3 months to live, right? And the person started getting more and more and more sick, and 3 months later passed away. It was only then that they discovered that they'd sent him the wrong records. They went to retrieve the records or whatever it was. They found that they'd mixed up 2 Mr. Smiths. One was in Massachusetts and one was somewhere else. I don't know, whatever it was. And it was the wrong Mr. Smith. He got himself into a blue funk and passed away thinking that he had a serious illness when he didn't. And it's a very strange thing. But these things are reality. They happen. Such things happen. So this whole concept, therefore, of not only trusting in God that he can do whatever it is that he wants, right? And he can do good things, but that he will, part of that depends on you. You have to put an effort into it, into really believing and seeing that this will indeed be the case. You can move mountains with this trust, yes. You can certainly move mountains with this trust. I have a friend. I used to live for a short while. I lived in Michigan, and I had a good friend over there. He was a guy who was unbelievable. I just couldn't praise him highly enough to the skies. A remarkable person. He had 2 children, one of whom was very, very physically very ill, and the other one was mentally ill. And here was a person that, no matter what, he always had a smile on his face. I mean, he had a tough, he still has, he's still alive, and saw his kids and everything. Tough life, tough life, but always a smile on his face. It wasn't a fake smile either; it was a genuine smile. It was always, he said, "Okay, look, that's the deal that I got," and obviously, it's Meis Hashem HaSazos, from God. It's in God's hands. I'm not going to let it get me down, right? He's the kind of person that will go around and cheer other people up when they face some kind of other tragedy, right? That was the kind of person he was. Right, that's a good point, Alex. Yes, good point. In any event, so this attitude is something that we have to work on. It doesn't come naturally, right? In fact, it's very unnatural for us to have such trust that everything will be okay. But the positive thinking aspect of it is not that difficult. Yes, we have to train ourselves, and we have to constantly remind ourselves that, listen, everything's in God's hands, and it for sure is going to be good, right? In fact, it's even good now, even though I might not see it that way, right? I might not be experiencing it now. But that itself, that trust in itself, brings positive results. Just as thinking positive brings about positive results. Tracht gut wird sein gut. Think positive, it'll be positive. If you think positive about a negative situation, but you look at the situation in terms of it's been resolved already, and all we have to do is actually get there, right? The resolution has already happened, but all we have to do is manifest it. Then somehow or another, even though we don't necessarily know how we're going to do it, but it'll work itself out. It's all going to be fine. Everything will work. Yes? So that is the idea of equanimity. A person's in a state of constant equanimity because I'm putting it in your hands, right? When we go to sleep at night, we say, I'm placing my soul into your hands, right? I'm placing my spirit in your hands. I'm going to sleep, you take care of it, right? Say to God, I'm going to sleep, you take care of it. It says about King Hezekiah, King Chizkiyahu. He was very ill on his bed, and there was a battle, there was a war, and he said, he prayed, and he said, I'm not in position that I can go and fight the battle, but you can fight the battle for me. He says to God, right? You fight the battle for me, and so it was, right? He won the battle without actually having to go and join in battle. He lay on his bed and prayed, and that was enough. So this kind of approach. You'll find, if you go with that kind of approach, that it has already been resolved. There is a solution, and the solution has already happened, and it has been resolved. And we're just waiting here until that actually reveals itself to be the case. And a person can be in a state of equanimity. He can be calm about everything. It won't be the end of the world. We're not going to end up, begging on the streets at the age of 75. Don't worry about it. Everything's going to work out. You're in good hands. Of course, that doesn't mean to say that you can sit back and twiddle your thumbs and just watch television all day. You have to make sure that you do your part. You have to do what's necessary to ensure the future. as far as you're concerned, as far as you do your part. But don't worry that it's not going to be great. It's not going to be good. It's going to be good. Everything's going to be fine, right? Life is going to be good. It's going to be good tomorrow. It's going to be good next month, next year. Things are going to go the way they're supposed to. And if you come with that kind of attitude, that actually changes the whole vibe. Kabbalistically, that happens as well. Any event that's happening is subject to interpretation. And the interpretation can change the event. That's basically what we're saying. But in a more technical sense, every event that happens is a permutation of divine names. Every event is a permutation of divine names. That's basically what's happening. It's a permutation of holy letters, divine letters. If one just accepts the letters as they are passively, the situation as it is in a passive sense, and you just accept it and I'll live through it, right? I'll somehow survive. Then you haven't changed the permutation. By thinking of it in a positive sense, by looking at the positive permutation of the thing, one actually manages to change the permutation thereof. That actually happens very often. That's actually one of the methods of the Kabbalists. One of the methods of the Kabbalists is to change the permutations of things, right? To change the permutations of things, so that a negative permutation. I've spoken about this before, actually, on a number of occasions, but I'll just explain it again over here. Noah was told the following. I'm just going to write some Hebrew words and then I'll explain what I mean soon, yeah? All right. Those letters, as you can see, these words are all the same letters. If I do it in English, it would be like this. Right, all the same letters, basically, right? Yeah, that would be, Tzahar, okay. Tzahar, Ratza, they're all the same letters. So, the story is told about Noah. He's told to make a window in the ark, right? Or some say a window, some say it was a source of light, somehow or another, a precious stone that gave off light, whatever. The word Tzahar. Along comes the Baal Shem Tov and he says like this: at a time of trouble, so a Torah means a window, Tzara means trouble, right? This word here, Tzara, is trouble. Ratza can mean either Ratza, to run, or Rotzeh is to want, to desire, right? Okay, so we have basically 3 or 4 permutations of the same letters, right? Says the Baal Shem Tov, when you come to a time of trouble, Tzara, Es Tzara Hila Yaakov is a time of trouble for Jacob, right? It's a verse. It's a time of trouble. If you can make the effort to change this permutation to that permutation, to the higher permutation, if you can change Tzara, Tzadik Reish Hey, to Tzohar, Tzadik Hey Reish, to a source of light, then you've basically done alchemy, right? You've changed the whole situation. You've changed the whole situation. Now, how do you do that? So he explains. To change Tzara into Tzohar, there's an intermediate step, or actually 2 intermediate steps. The first thing that you have to do is you have to do with alacrity. You have to move with alacrity. You have to move with energy. You have to be energetic. Yeah, Ratz, the word Ratz means to run, right? Running. Ratza, Ritza, running. You have to run to do what it is that Hashem, that God Rotzeh, same letters. You have to run to do what it is that God wants you to do. And that way, once you've gotten the intermediary permutation right, then you can change, that automatically changes this permutation into this permutation. The negative permutation of Ratza, of Tzara rather, into Tzohar. Right? The negative permutation of Tzara, anguish, trouble, into Tzohar, a source of light. Those two intermediary things is you have to do something. You have to do the moving, and you have to do it with alacrity, and you have to align it with the will of the Almighty. You have to align it with the will of the Almighty. And then negative changes into positive. And we can all do that. It's not such a big deal. Imagine the positive, whatever the positive would happen to be, and then run towards it by aligning yourself with the divine will. And that's how it works. Okay, everybody.